Now, for more on this, let's speak to SABC News correspondent Sherwin Bryce-Pease, and he joins us now via our video link. Now, Sherwin, thank you so much for your time. Now, the U.S. Ambassador-Designate to South Africa, that is Leo Brent Bozell, has now been appointed. What can we expect from this appointment?
Well, it does tell us that the wheels of confirmation in Bali do turn very slowly, right? Bozell was nominated by President Trump in March. He had his confirmation hearing back in October and was confirmed by the United States Senate in a block vote that received no endorsements from the Democratic Party in the Senate. So essentially on a party line vote confirmed in December. And you saw that picture posted by the U.S. Embassy in Pretoria earlier today of Bozell standing alongside his wife with his hand on the Bible, taking that confirmation from Senator Ted Cruz, a Republican senator from Texas, which in and of itself was a bit of an anomaly. It's not normally a United States senator that swears in an ambassador or a diplomat. That usually falls to the vice president or possibly a Secretary of State or a Deputy Secretary of State. So questions around why it was Senator Ted Cruz of the state of Texas that confirmed Bozell, but we might get those answers moving forward. And of course now his arrival in South Africa will be highly anticipated. Remember, the South African embassy in Pretoria has been out without an ambassador after Ambassador Bridgety, that served under the Biden administration, resigned in January of last year, essentially ahead of Trump's inauguration in January of the same year. So a highly anticipated arrival of Ambassador-Designate Bozell. He will, of course, have to present his credentials to President Ramaphosa. And it puts to rest, I think, questions around whether the South Africans were going to block this U.S. nomination. That seems to have been put to bed. So his imminent arrival, and of course coming at a fraught time in the relationship between South Africa and the United States. And I can tell you as well, Mbali, what Bozell said in his confirmation hearing, what the priorities will be. He said he will communicate U.S. objections to South Africa's geostrategic drift from non-alignment towards our competitors, including Russia, China, and Iran. He said he'll press South Africa to end proceedings against Israel at the International Court of Justice and pressure the International Criminal Court, the prosecutor, to discontinue this lawfare. Of course, you'll well know that the ICC has indicted the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his former defense minister, Mr. Gallant, for potential war crimes in Gaza. They've certainly been accused of that. And then he also talks about how he will advance the president's invitation to Afrikaners who wish to flee what he calls racial discrimination in South Africa. He'll explore how they can support South Africa's government to make sure all South Africans can thrive free from a threat of violence. He will also support the president's call for the South African government to rescind its support of the expropriation of private property without compensation. And finally, he says he will advocate for business interests by promoting fair trade practices and reduced barriers. So certainly a very populated agenda for the incoming U.S. ambassador to South Africa. And one imagines that it will be a very interesting relationship to watch moving forward, particularly, the welcome he might receive from, the presidency and the Department of International Relations.
And Sherwin, another major story that you've been monitoring is certainly the Supreme Court ruling. And I mean, a number of countries also monitoring the developments there. And now we do know that that ruling didn't come. Do we know why it's been delayed?
Well, the Supreme Court prefaces these sorts of judgment days, if you will, opinion days, by just saying on its website that they will be delivering opinions today. And so there was speculation that they were, among the cases that it is currently considering is whether President Donald Trump's reciprocal tariffs on nations around the world, including the 30% imposed on South Africa, is legal or not. And so this was ventilated in arguments in November, and a lot of conservative and a lot of liberal judges, right? You have the 6-3 conservative split on the Supreme Court in the United States. And there seemed to be broad consensus among the justices that perhaps the president's legal authority extended too far in terms of the imposition of these tariffs. There were, of course, 2 lower court rulings before that that deemed that the president had gone beyond his authority in terms of invoking what is called the Emergency Economic Powers Act of 1977, a law, Mbali, that authorizes the president to regulate international commerce during a national emergency. The question then is begged, right? Is it a national, are trade deficits, which are essentially the reasoning given by the president for the imposition of these tariffs, are trade deficits a national emergency? First question that might be answered by any forthcoming ruling by the Supreme Court. And then the second question is does the president have the authority to levy taxes? Essentially, tariffs are a tax, and the Constitution in the United States tells us that that is the exclusive authority, the purview of the United States Congress. So this is something that the Supreme Court is going to address, but remember, this comes after a lower court in Manhattan ruled, a trade court of international trade court ruled that the president went too far. This was then confirmed by a federal appeals court in Washington, D.C., but that decision was split 7-4. And it is on that basis, on that split, that the administration then went to the Supreme Court seeking clarity on whether these tariffs can go forward. But certainly the two lower courts have said it cannot, and so the expectation is that the Supreme Court will provide clarity here. And were they to rule against the administration, that would mean a number of questions around the tariffs that have been taken, the hundreds of billions of tariffs that have been taken in to date. What does reimbursement look like moving forward? So they might pronounce on that sort of thing moving forward, because a lot of companies are seeking reimbursement for tariffs. Particularly if the president's invocation of these tariffs are ruled illegal.
Very interesting times indeed. Of course, that is Sherwin Bryce-Pease, SABC News correspondent there, just giving us the latest updates when it comes to the U.S. ambassador to South Africa. Another major story is, of course, what he's monitoring from the Supreme Court, and that pertains to those tariffs imposed by U.S. President Donald Trump.